All right, hey guys, thank you so much for joining us on our YouTube channel. I am here with Barbara Whittier. My name is Mark Catelli. I'm the president of Cuplet Fern chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. We serve Seminole County. We have a regional presence across Central Florida. Today we have Barbara Whittier with us, our fan favorite out at Cuplet Fern. Everybody who knows Barbara loves Barbara. Great informative individual. She does a lot of good work, not just with us, but also at Nerling Gardens. And she brings in tons of plants. In case you have ever been to one of our programs, she brings in at least 15 to 20 plants every month just for the youth eco camp. And in case you guys are with the eco camp, thank you so much for your continued support. We raised over $600 last year, and we sponsored 6 children for the Youth Eco Camp, 6 scholarships. It's not cheap. Each child that is sponsored, it's $147 per child per week at the Seminole County Natural Lands Eco Camp. So thank you so much, Barbara. Barbara's late husband is Dr. Whittier, Henry Whittier. He was the director of the UCF Arboretum. And Barbara has been a member of the Florida Native Plant Society since 1982. She's been with us for a very long time. Thank you so much for your continued diehard support for native plants and our native ecosystems, and bringing awareness of the priceless cost of natural Florida. It's priceless. You can't even put a cost on it. So thank you for all you've done, even before I came on the scene, Barbara. And thank you for all that you continue to do and will do as an advocate for native plants.
Well, thank you for having me on this station.
Yeah.
Today, trying to promote, again, native plants in our mixed landscapes that we have in our yards. The whole idea through decades and decades of work of everybody was to try to get the public to appreciate the importance of native plants and conservation and preservation of lands wherever possible. And we've been trying to do that here in Seminole County.
Yes, it's because of people like you that are so diverse in their approach. You work with natural lands, you work with parks and recreations, you worked with other small gardens, you worked with IFAS, you worked with us. You're very well-rounded in your approach. You understand citizen action, and you also understand that the change begins at home. So we're so happy to have you, and it's a personal honor for me to have this as part of our library on YouTube so we can revisit it year after year for many years to come.
Oh, thank you.
So let's dive right in. Let's talk about some of your go-to favorites. Is there a particular one that you'd like to discuss first, Barbara?
I have a variety of plants, some which, and all of these are very easy to grow once you get them established. Some are used as screens, some are used in a vine kind of condition, some are ground covers, some are drought tolerant, some need more mixed soils. But the whole idea is to promote plants that will give people a longer period of time of sustainability. And I think the first one I'd like to start with is the firebush.
Okay, guys, we're gonna share a screen. We're gonna go to fnps.org. So when you're at FNPS, just click on this tab that says Native Plants for your area. And which particular plant would you like me to look up, Barbara?
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
Which particular plant would you like me to look up?
Firebush, please.
Okay. There it is.
When we look at a landscape, in many cases, we find that our homes have a mix of variety of plants from around the world. But one of the nicest things with the firebush is that it is fairly tolerant of a variety of soils. It's not drought tolerant, but it does tolerate periods of dryness. Native plants are adapted to those kinds of environmental conditions. So typically I would use the firebush as a backdrop or a screen or a focal point. And one of the beauties of this particular plant, it brings in, of course, butterflies, but it's always one of the first plants that hummingbirds will go after. And it's a very easy plant to place in your garden. The long-winged swallowtail is one of the most dynamic butterflies that we have in our yards. This time of year, what I do after the freezes, although this year we didn't have many, I start trimming them down. My firebush typically are about 5 to 8 feet, so I'll bring them down to about 4.5, 5 feet. And you can have any height that you want, depending on the kind of conditions that you have.
Yep. So moisture tolerance is just a little bit above moist. It can handle moist to slightly dry conditions. Has great tolerance for pH range. So many of our soils here, if you live in an old development, chances are you were developed on a sand hill or a dry area that has been continuously dry. You know, especially after the rainy season, the rain tends to wash off your land relatively quickly. That is an indication that your development was built out on a high point. And typically those ecologically or geographically used to be sandhill or scrub. So your soil pHs are naturally acidic. So firebush actually works really well from pH ranges of 5.5 to 8.2. So has great tolerance for you know, moderately acidic to moderately basic conditions. And this is wonderful. It says closely related plants occur in the Caribbean and Central America. Yellow or orange fruited plants are not Florida native. So Barbara, you have what I consider the true Florida native. You have
Florida native. The difference between the two is the way they grow. The Florida native is more open, multiple stems, and I always see it's very versatile in the garden. The horticultural or South Central American one is a tighter, bushier type of plant. It does bring in butterflies, but I like the native because I can put other plants underneath it. It just has a more natural aspect to it.
Agreed. Agreed. Do you hack it all the way back during early spring? Is your firebush in your yard very cold sensitive? Does it die all the way back, especially after frost?
I have in the front yard, it's more sensitive to the northwest freezes and the wind. So most of mine are now in the backyard. The other thing that I found is that in the worst case freezes, the leaves will just turn black almost immediately within 24 hours. The stems, for the most part, are going to be okay.
Okay.
Unless they're very soft tissue. The more Whittier stem, part of the stem will be a stronger sustaining material. So I'll still cut it back, only so it kind of creates another set of branches and it fills out. So after the flowers, of course, then you have those beautiful juicy little berries, and the catbirds come in, the cardinals come in, the brown thrushes come in, and this year I've just had a wealth of birds coming and going all the time.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and for those of you listening, we're here with Barbara Whittier, our fan favorite at Cuplet Fern Chapter. She's discussing firebush with us. Firebush is a great flowering native plant, but it also bears these juicy fruit that the birds go crazy over. All right.
Well, the next one I'd like to talk about is the Beautyberry. Lovely. This is a plant people love or they hate. I like to use it as a focal point or as a screen. And I like it because of the leaves, the shape, the dynamics. The flowers are small little pink flowers, and the bees and small insects will come in for the nectar. The fruit, as you see here in this picture, could be used by birds. I haven't seen many birds on the fruit, but I would assume that if they really did not have a lot of feeders around, they would be going to the beautyberries. It's an accent point, it's a screen, a focal point in the garden, and it's a pollinator plant that just is very decorative.
Very decorative. Barbara touched on a very important subject. In case you guys don't have bird feeders or, food sources readily available that you put out for your wildlife in your neighborhood or in your yard, plant beautyberry. It's one of those few fruits that persist late into the winter, and the birds do subsist on it, especially if they don't have a more high caloric option. Beautyberry fruits are not particularly dense in calories, but the birds will rely on it if they don't have other options around them. People do choose this plant particularly for its fruit, bright purple. I've seen people that post fruits of white coloration, the white beautyberry. Those are not native. Those are typically ones that you'll find from the Orient or from China, from Japan. They do have Calocarpa species out there as well. So it's very rare to find an Alba variety of this native. And chances are, if you do have an Alba variety, a white version of the variety, you need to make sure that it is the native one, because chances are you have the Oriental variety.
Okay. Very good.
So soil pH, again, great for circumneutral soils as well as moderately acidic soils. And it says here that it works in mesic hardwoods, xeric hammocks, scrubby flatwoods, disturbed dry moist woods. This particular plant is showy and it tolerates much more drier conditions than the firebush in the previous page. So in case your yard is high and dry, you don't have irrigation, or you're planting this plant in an irrigation-free area, consider beautyberry. It works well when it's paired with a young tree as well. It works great as an understory plant when you're planting it in tandem with a tree. Trees really don't kind of take up the.
If you could go down and scroll to habitat for one more time and soil conditions.
Sure.
Soil conditions. There we go. Right there.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I think a lot of people forget, they see the pictures of the plants, they see the coloration of pH and wet to dry. But if they know the word dry mesic, if they understand xeric, if they understand flat ground or moist ground, moist soil, and look at their landscape, look at their soil conditions, light, shade, moisture, things like that, they can get a better handle if that plant will work in their yard.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so guys, your native habitats can also be found in your backyards, depending on, if you're fertilizing, if you're not fertilizing, irrigating, things that have changed. So keep in mind, like if you have a park nearby, a natural area, take a look at it. Chances are you have the same habitat in your backyard as well. All right. Would you like to go over to the next plant, Barbara?
Yes, Simpson stopper, please.
Okay.
This has to be one of my favorite large bushes. I use it as an accent in the backyard, and I'm recently placing it on the side of the property as a screen barrier. And the beauty of this thing, it's very versatile in different kinds of soil conditions. If all you have is a yard with sand, you can just amend that with garden soil. Make sure you plant plenty of water in there initially. But the Simpson stopper is very thick and bushy, beautiful little fragrant flowers, which later make those orange fruit that the birds will come and take, as well as the squirrels. And it is just a good native screen for your yard. What I call passive landscaping in an HOA.
Do you prune this at all, or do you like to leave it alone and let it?
What I did this last week, I dug out and I picked up a lot of root material from 2 or 3 little runners that were about 3 feet tall. And I put them on my side of what I think is my property line. And with the rains and the way I set it in and the moisture and making sure there's no air bubbles in the soil, the leaves have not wilted at all. Taking them from a mother plant, so to speak, can be iffy, because if you're in sand, there's a good chance that the soil will pull away from the roots, and immediately there's going to be stress for the roots. So you want to contain as much soil with those roots when you're moving it from point A to point B. But mine have been flowering for the last 3 or 4 years, and this year in the backyard, they are really taking over. They're about 5, 6 feet tall now, and I put them in when they were about 3.5.
Question. So these flower early in the spring, is that right?
Yes. Well, depending on the climates, yes.
That's true.
They started flowering this year somewhere in late February. Late February.
Yeah. Yeah, it just keeps getting sooner and sooner because
that's what
it just keeps getting warmer and warmer faster, doesn't it?
It is. It is.
Now, do you observe pollinators that visit this plant? Is it only particularly honeybees that visit it, or are there others?
Mostly insects and bees, little wasps, bees. You know, these insects and butterflies are opportunistic anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
But all I've been seeing are the green bees, some small wasps. I haven't seen any butterflies on them, but I know I don't keep the fruit on for very long.
They don't. Yeah, it's very rare to see.
And I don't see them sprouting on the ground, so the birds must be getting them.
They do. They're quick at it. Matter of fact, you may have a small party of birds that like to revisit your yard over and over again. They mark their territory.
That'd be the catbirds in the backyard, probably.
Awesome. So, guys, if you're looking at the screen, moisture tolerance again, it prefers slightly moist to drier conditions, which is wonderful news in case you are trying to taper out your irrigation or go irrigation free. Also, tolerates good pH ranges, circumneutral, slightly moderately acidic. It can also handle slightly basic conditions. Great wildlife, great, privacy screen plant. This is what Barbara is recommending to you guys. In case you have, if you want to create a border, utilize Simpson stopper.
Yes.
All right.
And interesting enough, in the native habitat there, where they say tropical rockland hammocks over the coast or coastal hammocks, they're very versatile anyhow. Even
Yes. Matter of fact, look at the map here. So it's hugging the entire East Coast, and then it has a more broader distribution in South Florida. So. It does well in Seminole. That's where we're at, and it's found in Orange too. I would be surprised.
The map gives people a very good idea of the kinds of conditions to look for growing those plants.
And then they also pair it with U.S. hardiness zones here too. So the reason why it goes so far north here in north central Florida. I believe that's Palm Coast, and I don't remember what the name of this county is, but the reason why it hugs the coast so far north is because of the moderating effects of the Atlantic Ocean. So they don't receive such harsh winters because the water stays relatively warm even during wintertime, so it moderates the weather on land close to it as well. All right, Barbara, would you like to move on to the next one?
Coral honeysuckle, please.
You got it. There it is.
This has to be one of my favorites for bringing in hummingbirds and butterflies, but specifically hummingbirds. You can put this straight on a chain link fence. You could put it on a trellis. I make a 4-legged trellis in the backyard, close to where I have a winged elm. And I trim it once a year, somewhere in maybe December. And it has been putting out long runners for the last several months because it's much warmer now. And of course, flowers.
Right.
This is a hummingbird draw.
It is.
Wherever you put it, they will come to it here.
Yes, they do. I love this plant. I love this plant. Do you have it by the windowsill so you can see some?
No, it's in the middle of the yard.
Okay.
And I don't have any hummingbird feeders or any of that kind of stuff. It's all this and a few other types of plants.
Yeah. Why do you need to feed your wildlife when you can grow a hummingbird feeder?
Exactly.
Or a bird feeder. Grow your bird feeder, like they say. I particularly love this plant because you can hack it down. It gets a woody base, but some of the more tender shoots, you can prune it back down. I prefer this plant over some of the other vines, our native vines, such as crossvine and trumpet vine, because this is a more forgiving plant when it comes to latching onto things. Crossvine will really adhere to a surface. It will fuse to the trunk of a tree or a wall, and really establish itself. And if you go out there and try to hack it back or pull it back, you're going to have some difficulty. But with coral honeysuckle, you can pull it back. It doesn't have those those latching on tendrils that fuse to a surface. It's just a trailing, gentle-looking vine, and you can actually leave it as a trailing vine on the ground too. Well, it can just blend right in to your landscape.
When you get it on the ground and you cover it up, or it grows into the soil, it will make rootlets at certain nodes, and you have more plants to give away.
Good gardening tip there, Barbara. Thank you. So in case you're interested in layering some of those runners, you can do that. And you can get future coral honeysuckle that way. I love that idea. Great tip, Barbara. Thank you.
But you made a good point. This is one of the vines that is, as you pointed out, more forgiving. It does not create a bushy adherence to a tree or anything like that. Anytime I see things crawling on a tree, I always worry a little bit about, okay, the potential of fungus buildup or cracking of the bark and ants coming in, things of that nature. Even the natives can do that. But this one works very well as just on a trellis or a fence or anything like that.
Right. So for gardeners who are just starting out and they're kind of iffy about where they place this plant, you can change your mind with coral honeysuckle. You can transplant it easier rather than with crossvine, which tends to fuse onto a trunk. If you've ever seen crossvine, Bignonia capreolata, or Campsis radicans, I think that's called trumpet vine. they
Mm-hmm.
really fuse to the trunk or the surface that they're climbing onto. So ripping it off causes stress on the plant, causes stress on the tree also in case it's on a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And it's resistant for you guys to change your mind. So that one is almost where you need to plant it and you need to commit to it. That's where you place it, and that's where it's going to be for the rest of its life.
A lot of times, even though it is native, it can become
Aggressive.
quite thick, exactly, in the canopy, and in so doing, reducing chances for limbs to grow or levels of photosynthetic activity. So you have to be very careful on some of those vines.
Correct. Correct. So guys, the moisture tolerance, it also is great, very forgiving, likes it moist, likes it somewhat dry as well, which is also an indication that this plant has adapted to Florida's seasons because we have a wet and dry phase. So it's an indication that this plant has adapted to that. It is unfortunately not salt tolerant, but will grow in sand, clay, or loam. And pH, it prefers circumneutral pH. Great wildlife, excellent. It's your hummingbird feeder, like Barbara said.
And it's fairly drought resistant. I have no troubles, in the back. And I don't use my irrigation. I'll use hoses if I need to once in a while, and that's about it.
It's wonderful. And apparently is also the larval host for the spring azure butterfly. So it does have a larval host for one of our butterfly species. That's wonderful. Okay, Barbara, would you like to cover the next one?
Corky stem passion flower.
You got it.
Now this is a real gem. It likes semi-shade where I have it in the front yard, and yet I've seen it where it gets sun all the way down to about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But the beauty, this is a delicate little green floral passion flower that is the nectar plant, the nectar plant of the long-winged swallowtail, if I remember correctly. And though I have it growing on a magnolia, and it's very bushy up in the top, it's not crowding. So this is a very gentle passion flower if you'd like to bring something into the yard that'll bring in the long-winged butterflies. This one does it.
Yeah, in my neighborhood, we see longwings, but we see a lot of Gulf literaries. So it happens to be the larval host for the Gulf literary butterfly as well.
Okay.
I cannot grow enough of corky stem passion vine in my yard. The caterpillars eat it up to the nub.
Well, that's step one for the butterfly.
That's right. It's a good problem to have. But in case you are having the same problem and you can keep it alive in your yard and they're just voracious and they're eating it to death, especially younger specimens of this plant, I recommend that you mix it into the landscape a little bit, like mix it into some of your shrubs or flowering hedges or low-growing wildflowers. And the reason is because you're mimicking what you find in nature. If you're looking at this plant in a conservation area or a park, you'll see this kind of hiding and popping its leaves here and there. And that's its strategy to avoid detection, though it does not successfully do so, avoid overt detection from butterflies. So it can help it grow a little bit if you let it mix into some of those low-growing shrubs and wildflowers. Can help it get established itself, and then you can move it into a more prominent location once the cork of the corky stem starts becoming more and more evident. But the caterpillars favor the more leafy, succulent, herbaceous parts of the plant. But once they get to the cork part of it, it's not really cork, but it's more lignified, as we say. They do not like to munch on that, and then they leave it alone. So I would recommend, it's very easy to grow from seed. If you get those black little berries or fruits, you can stick them in a potting medium and they'll sprout readily. But give those plants a fighting chance, especially in year one before the butterflies love it to death.
See, this is what I've noticed even in the frontier where I have the largest population. Little plantlets are starting to show up in other locations. So hopefully we'll have more warblings and fritillaries coming in.
Yes. This happens to be one of those plants that the birds like to donate into your yard too. So even if you don't have a corky stem passion vine, over time, chances are you may find one, an errant one, a surprise one. It's like Mother Nature gifting you a corky stem passion vine that you can raise and make your own. But it does travel from yard to yard. It's very forgiving. It doesn't have any of those aggressive qualities that you akin to some of our vines. You can uproot it. It's a little bit sensitive to transplanting. So just watch those roots a little more carefully when you transplant it and keep the soil moist. But it's easy to move around in your yard. You can always change your mind with corky stem passion vine. All right, Barbara, would you like to try?
Yes, June sunflower, please.
You bet.
Now, this is one of those plants that will bring in a whole variety of bees, different kinds of bees in your yard. But it is also one of the best ground covers for areas that are basically full sun and barren. It'll last from anytime springtime through about October or early November. Then it'll appear to die out. And guess what? Come springtime again, or even February, it'll just start filling out. But I recommend this as a filler, as ground cover. It is a helianthus that will just bring a whole variety of insects in and very easy to take care of. The one thing you don't want is to have a lot of irrigation on it because that'll kind of start it to rot out. It needs to have full sun.
That's correct. Matter of fact, you can love this plant to death. So be careful. No watering. Once it's established, kind of let it do its own thing. It will form a mounding appearance, low growing, will reach out for the sun. So in case you plant it in a semi-shade location, don't be surprised if you find this plant moving more and more into full sun areas of your yard. So it really likes it and favors it. Easy to grow, highly salt tolerant. Matter of fact, beach dune sunflower, as you see, its natural range really hugs the coastline. And that's where this plant was naturally found. It happens to be very favored in the DOT, the Department of Transportation, because of its ease of care. It requires very little rain, so there's no irrigation, so it saves a whole bunch of tax dollars when used in roadside improvement or expressway beautification. Here in Central Florida, it's extensively used on the 408 expressway. You'll see this along with muley grass and firebush. Excellent drought tolerant plant. Can't say any less good things about it. And as you can see from moisture tolerance, it likes it super, super dry. It can tolerate those seasonal rain patterns, but after that, leave it alone. Barbara, a question for you. When you notice after a couple of years, do you notice it getting a little leggy, as they say, where the stems get really long and defoliate?
Yeah. And sometimes dying back. So probably you could try what I would do when they get that woody 2 feet of legginess, cut them right back 4 or 5 inches from the ground.
Well, and do you time that with the summer rainfall pattern? Is there a particular time that you like to prune it so aggressively?
I will only go and cut them. We have them at the Sanford Garden Club. So I will only cut them somewhere in October, because I want them to seed out as much as possible, because I'll go back and pick up pups or relocate where they are in the yard and put them where the cactus are growing or things like that.
Awesome. And it's a short-lived perennial, guys. So keep that in mind. Matter of fact, we had another viewer a couple of live sessions ago inquire about Gaillardia, blanket flower. Blanket flower is the same thing. It's a short-lived perennial. It's not going to stay. It's not the same plant is not going to be in your yard for many years to come. So you do want this to seed. So I think Barbara's really recommending the right course of action. Wait until the plant seeds, and then cut it back a late fall, and then rely on some of those young seedlings to be the next generation for this plant.
I will mention that I have cut them back at the garden club, but they did not leaf out. Sometimes they may, and sometimes they won't.
Right.
Really want them to seed out, and they will seed in the yard, and you just relocate or give them to friends.
Have you noticed birds eating the seeds? Do they like the seeds in this one, or is this mostly?
I haven't seen any.
Yeah. Okay. Me neither. I have never seen.
I think it's more windblown seed, because the plantlets don't show up more than about 4 to 5 feet from where the mother plant was.
Gotcha. All right. Sounds good, guys. In case you guys have any questions or comments, please comment away. We've been talking one-on-one here, but Barbara can answer any of your comments here. We're taking them live on YouTube. But yes, Barbara, what is the next plant that you'd like to cover?
Tropical sage, please.
You got it.
Now, this is a very interesting plant. The tropical sage, in my population of plants, and I usually see this towards end of July or August, will be red, will be pink, and will be white. Incomplete genetic dominance here. But the beauty of the tropical sage, the red form, which, like I said, you'll see the other two colors throughout the year if you allow it to grow out and seed out. It will bring in bees, insects, whole variety of butterflies, including hummingbirds, to these plants. Now, right now, the portion where a lot of the old flowers are, they'll have little dark capsules where the seeds are. So I'll collect them, and 4 or 5 feet away, I'll just throw them out into the yard. So after a period of time, you will find these plants towards the end of the season showing, give or take, 55–60% of them will be red. Some were about, or 70%. Some of them will be, about 10% will be around pinkish, and about 4 to 5% will be pure white.
Yeah.
And then some years you may not see the white, but only a few pink, but mostly red.
This is a classic example of Mendelian genetics.
Incomplete dominance.
Right, right. So red is the dominant color, but they do have recessive traits, which is white. When you have red and white genes present in the same plant, chances are it may exhibit both in modest quantities and make the flowers pink. But then in case you have recessive genes being exhibited only, then your flowers will be white. So yes.
So what you have basically is the red ones are homozygous dominant, and the pink are heterozygous dominant, and the whites are the homozygous recessive.
That's right. Yay, Barbara, science.
I had to put that in, I'm sorry.
I love it. Gardening Science 101. I love it. So it's a great plant. Barbara, I hate to break this to you, but I have not had good success with tropical sage in my yard. I
If
think
that's
it's
the
too
case,
dry.
ask yourself what kind of soil. If it's a lot of sandiness, or as in many constructions of homes, they'll take cement rubble and put it under the soil.
That's right.
So that's going to change your pH into a more acidic condition.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do is possibly put it where there's a little more leaf litter and several inches of more richer soil,
Mm-hmm.
or either get a couple of bags of garden soil. And if all you have is a sand base, dig it in, and now you have a mixture where you have well-drained but organic soil, and you should be okay.
And folks, keep in mind that this is an annual, okay? So, if you're looking for a plant, just like beech dune sunflower, just like gaillardias, beech dune and gaillardias are short-lived perennials. So they may only last, each plant may only last a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
But with tropical sage, it's only going to last a year. So you really need this to seed itself. Lucky for you, it's a frequent seeder. It'll donate itself into many different parts of the yard. In case you have nocturnal animals, I have raccoons and possums here in my neighborhood. So I'll find tropical sage pop up here and there. And I realize now that it is because of animal movement
Mm-hmm.
that these seeds are getting dispersed further and further away. But keep in mind that it's an annual. So when you're buying this plant at a plant sale that we usually have, or at a local nursery, you really want to, rely on the next generation and
Mm-hmm.
slowly grow it into a small little pretty grove, just like this person did. This is a great, excellent foreground, medium height wildflower. So it looks very captivating. At the bottom, it looks like they planted some Monarda as well for good color variation. It makes a very striking little hedge, but you want to make sure that the hedge reseeds itself year after year. So there is a little bit of gardening upkeep associated with this plant on a continued basis.
In the winter time, typically it's winter being late November, December, January for us. It will look very scraggly. So sometimes I'll just go in and I'll just break them in half.
Mm-hmm.
And as the spring and the rains come, you will find little pups all over the yard. So I go around and I pick them up, pot them up, or put them back in the garden.
Yeah. That is also your game plan, guys. Gardeners, if you're tuning in and you're listening, we're here with Barbara Whittier, favorite at Cuplet Fern Chapter. She's been a very long time supporter and advocate of Fluorinated Plant Society and our natural environment. Barbara is going through some of her tried and true favorites in her yard for you guys to get inspired from as well. Barbara, would you like to touch on the next plant?
Wild coffee, please.
You got it.
This has to be one of my favorites. It creates a tropical appearance in your garden. It's a native coffee. It makes little seeds, just like a regular coffee. And the beauty of this plant is that it can get up to about 5 to 6 feet in good soil, bush out, flower every year profusely. Insects come into it. I'm sure little butterflies. I see more insects, little wasps and bees. And then the fruit, it's fleshy. And again, the catbirds, the brown thrush, the cardinals, and the jays, they come in for the food. But it also can be used as a screen, a neighborhood screen. So now you have food for insects and butterflies, wildlife, and privacy. Now, typically, This is a tropical plant of South Florida coastal areas. But if you have oak covers, hickory covers, sweet gum areas, anything of that nature where there's a buildup of ground humus and some level of moisture, not wet, well drained, this plant will work for you. Very easy. Worst case scenario, a bad freeze comes in. You always wait to the end of February, then trim it carefully, and it'll come back with the first spring rains.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions about wild coffee. People get concerned when they don't see the plant blooming or not producing seed. They get overly concerned if they plant it in the wrong place, if it's too much shade, if they're watering it too much. And the answer, go ahead, Barbara.
I think what happens, people probably water it too much. It's a light shade loving plant, well-drained soil, organic. Now, with that said, then people want to come back and use the hose every day. So maybe in a week and a half, you may give it some water once you've planted it. But after 3 different times of watering it, don't do it anymore. You'll rot the roots.
Correct. And
now, it may also, go ahead.
Mulching is your friend with this one. You want to mulch. You want to mulch the soil around wild coffee. Yes. It likes to stay moist, and a good way to differentiate between moist and wet is you just take a little bit of soil in your hand in a fistful, and if you are sensing the moisture but you can't squeeze out water, that's good. That's what you're looking for. You want your hand to sense that moisture in the soil, but it's not soaking wet that you can squeeze water, like a few drops of water out of it.
Exactly. The other thing is when you're mulching, you're also keeping the soil cooler. A lot of times people will put plants in and not even think of mulching at all. And they'll have the sun coming in and from the west, and it just bakes the topsoil for an inch or 2. And then that's affecting the roots as far as growing. So the mulch protects, reduces heat in the soil, as well as keeping the level of moisture.
That's a solid point there, Barbara. I appreciate that. That's great information. And for those of you who are joining us, we're here with Barbara Whittier, fan favorite of Cuplet Fern chapter, avid gardener, a constant native plant supporter, and advocate for our natural ecosystems here in Florida. We're discussing some of her tried and true favorite native plants, particularly for the Central Florida region. But as many of you know, Central Florida is a great overlapping area where we have some South Florida plants represented as well as North Florida plants represented. So we have a little bit of everything. So yes, thank you, Barbara. Would you like to discuss the next plant on your list?
Last one, Carolina jessamine.
That's an unusual one.
Gelsemium sempervirens. That's what happens with me. Names change.
I think we are still using Gelsemium sempervirens. They just don't have it here. Let me try looking it up just by Gelsemium and seeing what happens. Here we go.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. This is one of the first flowering vines of the season. And it is very easy to take care of. You get it set up. It's very drought tolerant. Climbs on trees, climbs on trellises, fences, what have you. But this is some of the very first nectar foods available for both the hummingbirds as well as a variety of insects, butterflies, and moths. And once you get a population of these growing, it's spectacularly beautiful in the trees.
I love it. I love it. And just like with coral honeysuckle, the vine, this trailing vine or liana, woody stemmed vine tends to not have those adhering characteristics. You can move this around. It's a little bit more rigid than coral honeysuckle. Coral honeysuckle is very pliant, and you can trellis it, you can braid it, you can work it into an arbor. This one has a more rigid structure, which in its own way is a benefit as well, because it kind of has its own feet to stand up on, per se. Wonderful large flowers, great. I love this plant when I see it in a hedge.
But you don't see it for sale very often. You're right.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Let's check out some flowers. These are some
They're
big,
beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
all right, I love it. I've seen people grow this on their yard fence in mass, so they'll grow multiple plants side by side. There we go. That's a great picture. But it does really well in a mass setting, and it's particularly striking when they all bloom in unison.
And it can be a good screen as well.
Yes, it can. Matter of fact, here it is trailing up a tree. So there's another application. Yeah. As far as light and moisture tolerance, it kind of likes it moist to dry. Again, another plant that demonstrates its adaptation to Florida's season rain patterns. Sand, loam, birds. It's a great plant. You'll see tons of different pollinators on it. It likes mesic to xeric hardwood forests, upland mixed forests, secondary woods, bluffs, floodplains, flatwoods, rutteral. So this actually demonstrates that it can be used in a variety of different habitats. And matter of fact, look at the natural range of it in Florida. It's exactly what this plant is adapted to. It can manage a variety of different habitats.
Very mixed soils.
So it's very well represented across the Panhandle, North, Central Florida, and South Central Florida. So it's decidedly a Florida native. It says it blooms in late winter and it's fragrant, and it's toxic if eaten, used in homeopathic medicine. Of course, we don't recommend eating any of our native plants here at Cuplet Fern, but here on the FNPS website, you can definitely look at different fun facts about each plant as well. Interesting enough, if you click on this link right here, folks, our viewers, the Florida Association of Native Nurseries, also known as FAN, if you click on this, it will list all different types of nurseries that carry that particular plant. So in case you're interested in seeing where you can buy that plant that we've just discussed, click on the FAN link right down here, and you can find more information on where to buy it. All right. So closing comments, Barbara, what are the top 2 things that you would recommend for any novice gardener that is just starting out with native plants? What are the first 2 things that you would recommend straight off the bat for them?
Coral honeysuckle, firebush, dune sunflower.
And what is your recommendation? Do you feel like we should exercise patience? Do you feel
patience is always the #1 rule?
Patience is a virtue.
One thing I always ask people: what kind of soil conditions do you have? What kind of light conditions? And what level of moisture? If you know those 3 items, you have a perspective of whether you can take a plant that is a coastal, mesic, organic soil, or an upland, dry, drought-tolerant type of plant. So once they know what they have in their yard, front yard, backyard, different kind of soils, moisture level and light levels, then they can ask what kind of plants would grow in those three conditions. Then whenever they put a plant in the ground, they dig a hole 1.5 times the size of the pot, fill it up with water, let the water percolate in a vertical and horizontal plane to the point you see no more water.
I agree.
Barbara, go ahead.
I think you touched very strongly on researching your land first before you start the plant. Yeah, and if you guys come out to some of our plant sales across the state, every chapter that we know of does plant sales pertaining to native plants. It's a great outreach for so many of our chapters that belong to the Florida Native Plant Society. But talk to the people there that attend those booths, and they'll be happy to give you some sage advice on what to choose when you're buying those plants. So ask them some general questions. They'll ask you, do you know what type of community you live in, what it used to look like, and then they can help you select some tried and true plants that will work, and will save you a lot of backtracking in the long run.
And have good success.
That's right. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for joining me. This was wonderful. I learned a lot. Always a pleasure learning at your feet, Barbara. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you another time. All right. Bye for now.
Bye.